The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. I'm Wes, and that's my wife and co-host Beth.
Hello, everyone.
We hope you all had a great Memorial Day weekend.
We're in the middle of an extended long weekend, so it's been good for us. I'm all in for staying up late and sleeping in the morning.
Well, I know you work hard all week, so it is nice when you have a vacation. You can sleep in.
Yes, it is.
And, last night we did have a few drinks. A few. That's to put it lightly, I guess. We had quite a few. And we listened to some music. So it was nice to relax for a change.
It was. And we talked about how next week is our 1-year podcast anniversary already.
Yeah, I can't believe it's been a whole year already. It went by pretty quick.
It did. So 61 episodes, counting our premium bonus content ones, which means we've covered over 114 different topics already. That's just crazy to me.
It's hard to believe.
And there's hundreds more that we haven't gotten to yet, which just goes to show that there really is something to this paranormal, supernatural world. And although we may cover some topics that you have heard of before, some people haven't, and so that's why we cover them for all of those people who may be new to this stuff.
I just find it also fascinating. And yeah, since you mentioned our premium bonus content episodes, we should remind everyone that there's a new one up. So if you haven't had a chance to check them out, go ahead.
And they're a little looser, I guess you could say, than our regular episodes. You tend to leave stuff in that you'd normally edit out for our regular episodes, but I think it gives a chance for everyone to get to know us a little bit more.
Yeah, that it does. And that word looser, that's a bit like the word moist to me. Looser. We're a little bit looser. So we do have some cool merch in our TeePublic store, so that's worth checking out if you're interested. It costs nothing to look, so who knows, you might find something you like.
And I know it's kind of early to mention this, but I'm super excited about it. We are going to be at the Whitehall Sasquatch Festival this fall in Whitehall, New York. So last year, Wes and I went just as visitors, and this year, we have our own booth. So if you're looking for a day of Sasquatch experts and footprint casts and calling contests and meeting us, we'll be there.
Yeah, we really had a great time last year, and we met some pretty cool like-minded people. And it's in September, so we'll update you as it gets closer. Also, we will be sharing our story on Jim Harold's Campfire, about our stay at the Tilly Pierce house in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and our encounter with something otherworldly that woke us up in the middle of the night. We caught it all on digital voice recorder, and it's really freaking creepy and interesting.
It is, and we covered it on one of our episodes earlier in the year when we were first starting out, but I thought that it was a story that Jim Harold might get a kick out of. So that should be airing sometime in June, I would imagine.
Yeah, it should be, and as soon as we know, we'll let you all know, because I think you'd be very interested in it. And it's very, who knows what goes on when you're sleeping? Well, if we wouldn't have had the EVP recorder, we would have never known. And it's creepy as all hell. So you're going to want to hear this episode. So with all that said and done, what are we talking about tonight, Beth?
Well, in episode 43, I talked about the Greenbrier Ghost, the only documented court case in history where a ghost actually helped solve her own murder.
Yeah, it was quite unbelievable.
But in this story that I'm covering tonight, a ghost unfortunately caused a murder. The people of Hammersmith on the outskirts of London were terrified in the winter of 1803. Each evening between 9 p.m. and 1 a.m., a specter was walking through their churchyard, in their fields, and even through their town's streets. Dressed in a white shroud, the ghost was thought to be that of a man who had taken his own life the year before. Buried in the consecrated ground of St. Paul's Church, they believed his tormented soul was never at rest, and instead was out to inflict harm on the townsfolk. There were many scary encounters with the ghost of Hammersmith beginning that November. One wagon driver, carrying 16 people and driving a wagon pulled by 8 horses, was confronted by the vision of the ghost. Terrified out of his wits, the wagon driver actually ran away from the wagon, leaving the horses and the passengers to their fates. Then there was the rumored case of a pregnant woman who was crossing near the churchyard around 10 p.m. one evening when she saw a massive white figure rise from one of the gravestones. It actually tried to grab her, and she took off running, only to faint a short distance away. Hours later, she was discovered by a neighbor who brought her home and put her to bed. The woman, unfortunately, allegedly died from fright.
That is a true thing. You can die of fright.
I know. I saw that recently on something, and I couldn't believe it. And the same thing reportedly happened to an elderly woman who was also walking past the churchyard alone one evening. A huge figure, shrouded in white, seemed to materialize from behind a gravestone. It pursued her until it physically grabbed a hold of her. The elderly woman was able to get away, but she too reportedly died from the frightening shock of it all. But it wasn't just women who encountered the Hammersmith ghost. Thomas Groom, a brewer's assistant, and a male companion were walking through the churchyard one evening around 9 p.m. when they too saw something ghostly rise from behind a gravestone. Groom was too close to escape. The phantom grabbed him by the throat. His companion tried to help him, but the ghost was able to literally turn Groom around 180 degrees, and although he still felt hands around his throat, he could see nothing but cemetery stones. He shoved out with his hands and said it felt as if they came in contact with something soft, like a greatcoat, except there was no one there.
You just don't hear of ghosts grabbing somebody by the throat.
Very unusual. Pretty soon, most of Hammersmith had seen or knew someone who had seen the ghost. All said it was very tall and wore a white death shroud, or it was very tall and wore all white. But then some claimed they saw something new. It wore a calfskin garment complete with large glass eyes and horns. Sometimes it even looked like Napoleon Bonaparte, who was on everyone's mind at the time. Or the ghost's eyes glowed and it breathed fire. The ghostly apparition was so feared that, quote, every superstitious person in that neighborhood had been filled with the most powerful apprehensions, end quote.
You know what gets me, though? I mean, you said this apparition was tall.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Napoleon Bonaparte was not known for being a very tall guy.
Right.
He was quite the little fellow.
Right, which brings me to my next point. A lot of experts think that it was just a case of mass hysteria and that was what the real issue was.
Okay, we've heard this before.
So this wasn't an isolated incident. 83 years later, in 1889 Plaistow, England, 200 people gathered on Upper Road around 10 p.m. to catch a glimpse of their own ghost. The specter had been seen nightly for a month, hovering in the graveyard. 16-year-old George Orchard was actually arrested for extinguishing the street lamp, just so the townsfolk could see the ghost more clearly. Concerned for people's safety, the police demanded to know why George would do such a thing, especially since the crowds often turned rowdy. George insisted it was just so people had a better chance of seeing the ghost for themselves. Now, it turned out that this ghost was just the light from the lamp being cast onto a gravestone. So when George was turning down the lamp, it was creating a shadow, which everybody thought was a ghost.
Oh, well, you think if somebody had went into the graveyard and kind of debunked it for themselves, they would have noticed that, hey, it's just a reflection off a gravestone.
Right. So it was the police that basically sorted it all out. And thankfully, George was released from jail and the townsfolk went back to their daily lives. But in Hammersmith, now we're backing up 83 years, back to the story, the town I was talking about. It wasn't too long before several townsfolk came to the conclusion that the Hammersmith ghost wasn't a ghost at all, but that it was actually a living flesh and blood man dressing up as a ghost in order to terrify the town. Maybe it started as a prank that went too far. Or maybe the man had an unknown bone to pick with his neighbors. Regardless, rather than go on ghost hunts, the people of Hammersmith formed night watch groups to catch the prankster and to put a stop to it all. There was a 10-pound reward for anyone who could apprehend the man. This was easier said than done, though, because although he was spotted numerous times and almost apprehended, the prankster phantom seemed to have a pretty solid knowledge of the many lanes and paths through Hammersmith, and he eluded the pursuers. One patrolman got very close enough to even pull the bedsheet or white tablecloth off of the man as he struggled to get away. Which is funny, because I can kind of picture this patrolman like just, like a cartoon, like the whoop as he's holding the sheet in his hand and the scuttle sound as the guy runs away.
Kind of reminds me at the end of the Scooby-Doo episodes when the gang finally reveals who the culprit was.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
On December 29, 1803, a night watchman named William Girder saw the ghost near Beaver Lane. He pursued him, chasing him through the streets. This time, the man threw off the bedsheet himself in order to run even faster. He, of course, escaped. A few nights later, on January 3, 1804, around 10:30 p.m., Girder came upon one of the townsfolk who had joined a patrol. The man, 29-year-old Francis Smith, was armed with a shotgun. He was an excise officer, which basically means he was a customs officer. Now, the 10-pound reward was to catch the ghost, not harm it. But a lot of the patrolmen were armed, so Girder didn't really have any concerns. After talking with Smith, Girder said that once he called the hour at 11 p.m., this was back when night watchmen did the 11 p.m. and all is well kind of thing, I presume. He would pair up with Smith, and the two of them would patrol together. They went their separate ways, agreeing to meet up in half an hour. Now, remember, I had suggested that the Hammersmith ghost sightings had risen to an almost mass hysteria level. Everyone was convinced they had seen the ghost at some point, or they knew someone who had seen it. Bricklayer Thomas Millwood, however, was not one of those people. He pretty much thought the whole thing was ridiculous, especially since he himself had been mistaken as the ghost 3 times in the last month. On one occasion, he had been dressed for work in his white linen trousers, white flannel waistcoat, and white apron. As he was walking through town, a carriage drove past him. The man and his wife inside were convinced that they had just passed the Hammersmith ghost, and the man even called out, quote, "There goes the ghost." Millwood apparently called back to the carriage, asking if the man wanted, quote, "a punch in the head."
Awesome. But he kind of had to know that he's all dressed in white, and during this time, he could easily be mistaken for this thing.
Yes, except he thought that it was all hooey. He thought his neighbors were all going batty. Millwood's wife, mother-in-law, and sister all begged him to wear his coat over his work clothes once he'd told them what had happened. But Millwood, for whatever stubborn reason, said no. I'm assuming he figured he wasn't going to carry his coat around if he didn't want to, just because, as far as he was concerned, his neighbors were being idiots.
Yeah.
So the night of January 3rd, Millwood stopped by his parents' house on Black Lion Lane after work. He was still in his work clothes, of course, without his coat. Sometime between 10 and 11 p.m., Millwood's sisters suggested that he better head home. His wife was still in town, and she didn't want her sister-in-law to have to walk home alone while the prankster was still out there. Just a few seconds after Millwood left the house to go get his wife, his sister Anne heard a voice cry out, quote, "Damn you! Who are you and what are you? Damn you, I'll shoot you!" As she watched from the house, her brother didn't reply, probably because he was rolling his eyes and fed up with it all. Wordlessly, he kept walking towards Beaver Lane, anxious to get his wife and head home, I'd assume. Francis Smith, that 29-year-old customs agent with the shotgun, who had a little to drink during his night of patrolling, called out again. According to Anne, before her brother could respond, Smith fired his gun. The bullet hit Millwood in the face, killing him instantly.
Oh, no.
Yeah. A crowd formed almost immediately, including Anne, Francis Smith, and William Girder. All of the men in the crowd urged Smith to leave the scene. Smith, for his part, was entirely confused as to how a solid form lay on the ground. It seems he was convinced that he had really shot at a ghost and not a man. He didn't leave the scene, but was instead arrested by the constable.
That's sad.
It's horrible. Later that week, the Caledonian Mercury published the following article, quote, "We have to announce to the public an event, in some of its circumstances so ludicrous, but in its result so dreadful, that we fear if the reader should even laugh with one side of his mouth, he must of necessity cry with the other." Which I think sums it up pretty darn well.
Yeah, I love the way you put it.
Smith's trial was held a week later at the Old Bailey Courthouse. Now, here's the thing, and why I'm telling everybody about the Hammersmith Ghost murder. It became so complex that it remained a legal question in England for over 200 years. First, Smith was tried for willful murder. Anne, Millwood's sister, testified that she saw Smith shoot her brother almost immediately without really giving her brother any time to identify himself. He wasn't threatening Smith in any way and was simply walking home. The defense argued that Smith, believing that Millwood was an actual ghost, had fired in self-defense. William Girder testified during the trial about just how widespread the fear of the Hammersmith ghost had been and his own personal encounter with it prior to that night. The cross-examiner asked him how it had escaped, and Girder replied, quote, "Slipped the sheet or tablecloth off and then got it over his head. It was just as if his head was in a bag," end quote. When the cross-examiner asked how long people had been frightened, Girder responded it had been 6 weeks to 2 months of very great alarm. But John Locke, one of the crowd who had arrived right after Millwood had been shot, testified that Smith, quote, had shot a man who he believed to be the pretended ghost of Hammersmith. Locke went on to say that Smith was, quote, very much agitated and did not know it was that person. It was an extreme dark night. He had spoke to him twice and received no answer. The figure advanced on him and raised his fears more, end quote. The judge, Lord Chief Baron MacDonald's remarks to the jury showed just how convoluted this case really was. He said, quote, Smith had neither acted in self-defense nor shot Millwood by accident. He had not been provoked by the supposed apparition, nor had he attempted to apprehend it.
Plus, he had been drinking.
True. Millwood had not committed any offense to justify being shot, and even if the supposed ghost had been shot, it would not have been acceptable, as frightening people while pretending to be a ghost was not a serious felony.
I love it.
But a far less serious misdemeanor, end quote. So they could not, they debated back and forth over, was it a murder if you think it's a ghost?
Yeah, I find that incredible.
So after deliberating for an hour, the jury came back with a verdict of manslaughter, saying that it couldn't be murder if Smith truly thought he was shooting at a ghost. The judge was like, nope, not good enough. He refused to accept their verdict and told them it was either murder or it was an acquittal. It didn't matter if Smith thought Millwood was a ghost. He either killed a man or he didn't.
That sounds reasonable.
So then the jury found Smith guilty. He received the customary sentence of death by hanging, and then his body would be donated to science for dissection. However, King George III commuted his sentence to 1 year of hard labor instead. For 200 years, the Hammersmith Ghost murder case set a precedent that England's judicial system struggled with. If somebody commits an act of violence in an effort to stop a crime from occurring, only to realize later that they were mistaken and that no crime was being committed, is that person still justified in using violence? Or are they the criminal? They didn't make any official laws concerning this until the 1980s.
Wow. Wasn't that long ago?
No. This case literally stymied them for 200 years about how you handle something like this. As for the real culprit behind the Hammersmith ghost sightings, it really was a living, breathing man who was dressing up as a ghost and grabbing people. Just 2 days after the death of Thomas Millwood, a boot and shoemaker named John Graham came forward and admitted it was him all along. It started out as a prank. His apprentices had been scaring his children with silly ghost stories, and Graham wanted them to get a taste of their own medicine. For his part, Graham did turn himself into authorities, but they didn't really know what to do with him either. He hadn't actually committed any crimes other than the misdemeanor of purposely frightening people. Once he paid bail, he was set free, and no other charges were ever brought against him.
It's all so incredible.
I know. And I understand why they debated back and forth about, what is the law? What should it be?
Right.
And if only Thomas Millwood had just listened to his wife and worn his freaking coat, it wouldn't have happened.
Exactly. But his stubbornness prevented him from doing that. And then again, if you're the night watchman, you probably shouldn't be drinking. And if you got a shotgun, if the ghost wasn't really advancing on him, why shoot at it?
Well, how is a gun going to stop a ghost anyway?
That's true.
Like,
but he was intoxicated. To what degree, we don't know. But
right.
Yeah, it's...
it's all just a big mess.
It is. But it was definitely an interesting big mess.
Thank you. Hey, did you know? Unconsciously, native English speakers say adjectives preceding nouns in a specific order: opinion, size, age, shape, color, origin, material, and purpose. It's why saying new pink wireless earbuds or I like vintage American punk rock music the best sounds normal. But wireless pink new earbuds and I like punk vintage rock American music the best sounds weird. Who'da thunk it? So what are you talking about tonight, my dear?
Well, it's something that we're all surrounded by every day. So it's no secret that people have found some pretty interesting things in their walls while doing home renovations, from newspapers, movie posters, dated a century earlier, to cigar boxes filled with baseball cards, to really old, dirty underwear also. But
really old, dirty underwear?
Yeah, to really old, dirty underwear. But some of the objects that are found during renovations seem to be more creepier than others. Single shoes, mummified cats, and small glass bottles filled with fingernail clippings, herbs, and teeth, called witch bottles, come to mind.
I've heard of the cats and the shoes, but is that true about the bottles?
Of course it is. I wouldn't tell you otherwise.
That's true. I don't know why I doubted you.
I know, you should never doubt me. So why did people intentionally leave these things behind their walls while they were constructing their homes? The newspapers make sense. It was used as insulation to help cut down noise, like whistling from the wind. They also used movie posters, or perhaps some people could have possibly put them there as an intentional time capsule, as it could be a possibility. The tradition of hiding objects in walls has been around for centuries in all different cultures. It even has a name, immurement. It can be traced back to the ancient Egyptians and ancient Romans, but also to Freemasonry. Masons would intentionally hide things in the walls they built. But why? Well, mostly to bring good luck to the home's inhabitants. For example, in Ireland, it was traditional to bury a horse skull, or part of one, under the hearth. But you might be asking yourself, why cats, single shoes, and witch bottles? It can be pretty unnerving when new homeowners discover these things in their walls. And in the case of the shoes, it's recommended that you put them back exactly where you found them, if possible. Otherwise, you might just allow a restless spirit into your house. Now, in the case of the cats, the superstition began in England and Ireland. If you buried a cat in the wall or under the floor, it would ward off malicious spirits. That's just an educated guess, though, because the reasoning was never actually written down. Historians think the practice really gained popularity during the 16th century.
Well, if it's dated back to the 16th century, it must be related to witchcraft in some way.
Yes, you would think so. They were put there as a way to ward off vermin, kind of like putting a fake owl on your deck to keep starlings away, or a scarecrow in the field to keep crows away. But some also speculate that they were meant to ward off witches' familiars also. If both ghosts and witches could pass through solid walls, then maybe they'd think twice if they encountered a cat in an attack pose inside the walls. There's also the theory that placing cats in walls was a substitute for human sacrifice. Believe that or not, that's what they say. Centuries ago, this was an accepted practice. Sacrificed people were placed under the foundations of buildings to ward off bad luck and to appease angry gods. When sacrificing people was outlawed, people still strongly believed that a sacrifice needed to be made to ward off evil, so they turned to feral cats. They were considered foundation sacrifices, according to archaeologist Margaret Howard, and meant to bring good luck and fortune. Then later, people substituted things like coins instead of animals. There was one tradition that is still practiced today where people place money from other parts of the world into their walls in order to fill their home with good luck from all over the globe.
That's a neat idea.
When people find mummified cats in their ceilings or walls during renovations, they are understandably creeped out. But it's what they choose to do with a cat that runs the gamut. So people take them out and display them in their homes or businesses, and giving them affectionate names. Some, afraid of stirring up bad luck, put them right back where they found them. Then there's the stories of people throwing them out and then immediately having bad luck after. There was one story I came across while a British man in the late 1970s found a mummified cat while he was turning a stable block into apartments. The project man told him to throw it out. The man, Dave Parker, didn't think this was a good idea, but he did it anyways. When he came back from the garbage and climbed a ladder to resume work, a huge piece of plaster sheeting became dislodged and fell on his head, giving him a nasty cut. So was this coincidence or not? But often, the cats aren't just found stuffed in a wall. They actually are placed inside a chamber specifically built to house the good luck charm. This is where it gets a little rough, so we apologize, but we think it's kind of important to tell the whole story. The cat was placed in the chamber alive with burning candles.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Because people, they believed that the noises made by the distressed cat was going to ward off evil spirits.
That's horrible.
That it is.
I'm really glad they changed over to using coins and shoes.
I just don't think I would have been burning candles inside my wall anyway.
Never mind that the cat was suffocating and in horrible distress.
Of course, that goes without saying. But to put candles in your wall, burning candles? That's just kind of weird.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to keep in mind that we're talking about buildings that are very, very old, from the 1500s to the 1600s. And obviously, our attitudes about animal cruelty have evolved, thankfully.
Thankfully.
But when people came here from England at that time, they brought their traditions of putting cats in walls with them, which is why we find them here in our walls.
Can we move on to some inanimate objects?
Sure, we can talk about shoes if you'd like.
Okay, that sounds better. Is it better?
Well, yeah.
Okay.
Historians believe the practice of hiding shoes increased in popularity around the same time as mummified cats. Perhaps those people found the entire idea of sacrifice pretty distasteful, and they skipped the cat thing in favor of something non-living. Shoes have been found in all different places inside buildings, from ceilings to walls to chimneys to inside door frames. Usually it's a single shoe, but sometimes it's a pair. They're usually well worn and might even show some evidence of repair. Shoes seem to be a pretty popular item of choice during the 18th and 19th century, as far as intentionally encasing one inside a home structure. Occasionally, people find more modern shoes, but those tend to be by accident, based on their placement. The Northampton Museum in England actually has a concealed shoe index, where they've cataloged found shoes.
That's pretty cool.
It is very cool. In 1998, they had 1,100 reports of shoes found, and by 2012, the number had risen to 1,900 shoes. Almost half of those 1,900 shoes are from the 1800s. Through their index, some pretty interesting statistics came out of it. For example, 26.2% of the concealed shoes were found in chimneys or the hearth area of the building. 22.9% were found either under a floor or in a ceiling. So it's pretty evenly split between those places. And the buildings run the gamut from homes to hospitals to factories to churches. The oldest known example was found in the choir stalls of the Winchester Cathedral, which were installed in 1308.
That's an old shoe.
That it is. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to the choice of shoe either. Men and women's shoes are almost equally used, with 21.5% worn by men and 26.5% worn by women. It is interesting, though, that almost half of the found shoes belonged to children. Again, as colonists left England and came to the New World, they brought their traditions of superstition with them. The majority of concealed shoes have been found in New England, with Massachusetts being the most common area to find them.
Okay, so why a shoe specifically, and why just one shoe?
Well, the reasoning is pretty cool. The shoe is one item of clothing that molds itself to the wearer's actual form. Think about it. You can tell exactly who a shoe belonged to by the way it's stretched out, or by the way the sole is worn down in certain places.
Or the way it smells.
Right. We should put your shoes in the wall. Shoes have come in various sizes and styles for thousands of years, telling us something about the person who wore it. Historians think that leaving a concealed shoe was the closest way that they could get to leaving a part of their own spirit or essence. In fact, in some cultures, people believe that a person's spirit or essence was captured in their shoes. Well, your essence is surely captured in your shoes.
Thank you, honey. Embarrassing moment on our show, 101. Thanks.
You're welcome. And shoes were used in different kinds of ways, besides just protecting our feet. Some people threw shoes at newly married couples as they left the church, and shoes were tied to car bumpers way before beer cans ever were.
People would throw shoes at married couples?
I know. That precedes throwing rice. But throwing your shoes at married couples?
Whack.
Good thing they weren't wearing big boots, I guess.
Oh, interesting.
But shoes were also incredibly expensive. So choosing a well-worn shoe that might be beyond repair made sense. Especially if the other shoe still had some life left in it. They'd only have to replace one shoe and simply repair the other. Because when you think about it, when I was growing up, there were still shoe repair places. People had their soles fixed and things like that. So there are several theories as to why shoes were walled up inside homes. Some historians think that it's tied to the old nursery rhyme, The Old Woman in the Shoe. Now, some experts believe the nursery rhyme, which was published back in the late 1700s, was really a metaphor for Parliament, but that over time, people took it more literally. They related the shoe to fertility. There were even some superstitions where a woman hoping to become pregnant might slip into the shoes of a woman who had recently had a child. They called this custom smickling. So perhaps people placed a shoe into the walls of their building as a fertility charm. This might also explain why so many of the shoes belong to children. But then there's also the idea that shoes ward off evil witches. Popular belief was that dark forces liked the smell of human feet, and once they were distracted by a shoe, they became trapped inside it. Or the shoe was so molded into the shape of a person's foot that dark forces were confused by it, thinking that they'd found a living person's essence when in fact they hadn't. There was a well-known tale in the 1300s about a saint who had trapped the devil in a boot. So that might also be where the belief came from. And yet, there are other European superstitions in which helpful spirits are attracted to gifts given to them by the inhabitants of a home. The spirits might be quite pleased with the gift of a shoe and bestow good luck and good fortune on the family that offered it. So, as I said, the reasoning behind these concealed items was never written down, so experts are only theorizing. Which brings us to witch bottles. And of the three, I find these the most interesting. Witch bottles are generally made of salt-glazed ceramic and would fit in the palm of your hand. But they are sometimes made of glass also. They are onion-shaped, meaning that they have narrow necks and wide bulb-like bottoms.
Why are you looking at me when you say that? You looked right up at me when you said that.
Did I? Oh, maybe my eyes just needed a break here. Now, on the surface, finding one might be pretty exciting. I mean, it's a bottle from the 1600s. But if you do manage to open one, you might be a little taken back by what's inside. Generally, it's fingernail clippings, human hair, pins, scraps of fabric, shards of glass, and human urine.
Were they filled by alleged witches?
Well, actually no. The total opposite. They were supposedly meant to ward off witches.
Oh.
We've talked about the witch trials and the fear of witches on our show a lot, so I'm sure everyone knows that during the various witchcraft panics and both Europe and here, people went to all kinds of lengths to ensure that they were protected from all the supposed things witches could do to them.
But how are they supposed to work then?
Well, to start off, there was the belief that when you got that pins and needles feeling in your arm or foot, it was caused by a witch. So putting pins in a bottle was meant to stop that sensation from happening. But the more accepted idea in academic circles is that people believed that witches were attracted to the scent of human urine. They would enter the bottle, get stuck on one of the bent pins or nails, and become trapped.
So they believe that witches, alleged witches, liked the smell of human urine and stinky feet.
That they did. The bottles were placed in areas of the home where witches were known to enter through, like chimneys, for example.
That's super ironic because people were creating potions, putting them in bottles to trap other living beings, and then burying them in their house so they could stop the beings that they thought were evil and demonic from creating potions and cursing them. So I'm not sure if it's ironic or just flat out hypocritical. We're afraid of people making potions and cursing us, so we're going to make a potion and curse them. But they're the witch and I'm not. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that it doesn't. But I did find an interesting article about a private residence in Northamptonshire, England, that was once the Star and Garter Inn, and the birthplace of a woman named Angeline Tubbs. Angeline was born in 1761, and as a teenager, she immigrated with a British soldier to Saratoga Springs, New York, during the Revolutionary War. When the war ended, the soldier left her there. She made her living by telling fortunes, and she lived in a mountainside hut all by herself. She ended up being known as the Witch of Saratoga. So get this, the owner of the house in England, where she was born, found a witch bottle on the property. But strangely enough, it's too new to be tied directly to Angeline Tubbs. The bottle itself was manufactured in the 1830s. But it does show that the superstition lasted into the 19th century.
And it may still have been tied to Angeline Tubbs if somebody knew she was born there and still was superstitious enough to believe that her spirit could harm them in some way.
Well, a few witch bottles have been found in Salem, Massachusetts, but a few others have been discovered in the Hudson Valley of New York, where they experienced their own witchcraft panic.
Just to interrupt you for a second, I'm researching a topic right now about witch trials in Connecticut, and I'm wondering if they found any in that area too where I'm researching. I'll have to look that up. Mental note for myself. Tick. Okay, go ahead.
I can continue now?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. In 2016, near Colonial Williamsburg, Virginia, workers were widening Interstate 64 between exits 238 and 242. They came across the remnants of an old hearth, a broken dinner plate, and a green glass bottle. In accordance with Virginia state law, archaeologists were called in, and initially they considered the jade glass bottle just a bit of junk. The top was broken off, and all it had in it were rusty nails. They cataloged it anyway. A few months later went by, and one of the archaeologists realized what they had. It wasn't just discarded junk. It was a witch bottle. And it was a pretty damn intriguing one at that. First, they determined that the bottle was manufactured between 1840 and 1860 by the Charles Grove Glass Company in Columbia, Pennsylvania. And the hearth, where it was found, just happened to be part of a Confederate Army officer's quarters, a mini fort used during the Civil War. The mini fort was one of 14 that were built along the line between the York and James Rivers. The mini fort was captured by the Union during the Battle of Williamsburg in 1862, and the members of the 5th Pennsylvania Cavalry also lived there. When the archaeologists first found the green bottle full of nails, they just assumed it was part of the supplies used to repair the fort. But no, experts quickly came to realize that the green bottle was most likely a witch bottle, meant to protect one or all of the Union soldiers stationed at the fort from harm. Now, it was no secret that they were despised by the locals, and maybe at least one young soldier believed that the bottle would protect him. There are over 200 cataloged witch bottles in Europe, mostly in England, but only 12 have been found in the U.S. Many experts believe that there's a good reason for that. Over the centuries, as people found them, they threw them out, thinking they were just gross old junk. So if you think you may have found one in your walls or in your chimney or even buried in your garden, don't throw it out. Just leave it right there and give some local archaeologists or historians or professors a call. They'll happily remove it for you and put it in a museum where it belongs. If you live in an old home and you're sitting in your favorite comfy chair or lying on your couch while you're listening to us, just imagine what could be in your old walls. Kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? So what's funny about all this is that I remember when my uncle was doing renovations in the living room of his old house, and he found all kinds of old newspapers and movie posters in his walls. He was showing them to me, and they were all yellowed from age, and at the time I was around 10 years old. And I thought they were cool, but I really didn't have a clue back then. But it's kind of funny because now as an adult, I wish I could really sit down with these old newspapers and, really look through them, because by now they're long gone, and I just missed my chance. It's so sad because who knew what on these, what was written down in these papers.
Mm-hmm. And when I was a kid, I remember my dad extended a wall of our old farmhouse out so that he could make a laundry room and a half bathroom.
Yeah.
And he uncovered stairs that led to nowhere, which was pretty cool. But he also found newspapers that were from the 1920s. So at some point in the 1920s, somebody just bricked off a staircase and built a wall over it.
But that's what they did. It's so cool. I can only imagine, these people that go out and renovate old homes for a job.
All the cool stuff they find.
I can imagine everything that they find.
Mm-hmm. Like dirty old underwear, as you told us at the very beginning.
Right. I had seen some mentions of dirty old underwear in the walls, but nothing that was spectacular.
I saw one about a corset that had been set on fire and stuffed in a wall.
Really?
Yeah. I don't remember where I saw that.
Must be a
brothel or something. I don't remember.
Could be a brothel. Maybe a husband came home to his wife doing something that she shouldn't have been, and he kind of got angry and burnt it and put it in the wall. Who knows?
You have a weird thought process.
Well, how else do you explain something like that?
Right.
I mean, you got to kind of go way out there, right? In your thinking to think, why the hell would that be in the wall?
Right.
I was also thinking, instead of ripping apart a wall, we could always cut out like a small section of the wall and put our own time capsule in a wall. Who knows, who might find it someday? Leave a little something behind.
Like one of my stinky shoes?
Yeah, like one of your stinky shoes, that one. That'd ward off the evil spirits. And, well, when anybody ever goes to open up the wall, I can imagine they're going to get,
Scrape some DNA off there and clone me.
Wow, yeah. Just what we all want, a second one of you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that could be interesting. Well, with all that said, if any of you wanderers out there have found anything in your old walls, message us on Facebook. We'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, that would be cool. And unfortunately, we can't cover everything we find while we're researching for an episode. We have to condense it down. Otherwise, it would take days or perhaps weeks just to do one topic. So if you would like to delve deeper into tonight's topics, you can look at our sources in our show notes as a jumping off point.
That you can. I guess that about wraps it up for this episode. Beth, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So we thank you all for joining us.
And we'll see you next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you soon.